You ever look at a company and wonder, what's it really worth? Not just what the stock price says today, but what its value will be years down the road.
Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on exactly that. We're talking about forecasting performance, how the pros build a financial blueprint for the future.
Yeah, that's kind of the big question, isn't it? How can you possibly look at a business right now and make a credible, data-backed prediction about where it's going to be in 5, 10, even 15 years?
Well, I'll tell you, there's no crystal ball here. It's not magic. It's actually a structured, methodical process. The best way to think about it is like an architect designing a building. You're not just guessing, you're creating a detailed financial blueprint that maps out every single piece of that company's future.
And just like with any big construction project, before we start building, we've got to lay the groundwork. We need to make a few key design choices up front.
So how far out does this blueprint actually go? Well, the industry standard is to project about 10 to 15 years into the future. And I know that sounds like a long time, but there's a really good reason for it. That's typically how long it takes for a company to mature and settle into a stable, predictable pattern of growth. And that steady state is absolutely critical for figuring out its long-term value.
So, this whole thing, it breaks down into a pretty clear 6-step roadmap. We're going to start by looking at the past. Then we'll build out our predictions for the future, and finally, we'll calculate the key numbers that tell us what the company is actually worth. Let's jump in.
Now, a real pro model isn't just some messy, giant spreadsheet. It's usually organized into separate, clean worksheets. You've got your raw historical data, the financial statements that link together, your analysis and ratios, and even market data for things like the WACC, the weighted average cost of capital. Then you reorganize it all to calculate what really matters, ROIC and free cash flow. This structure is key to keeping things clean and accurate.
You want to know the secret to a really solid model? It's all about a logical, one-way street for your data. Information should flow from your raw inputs through your analysis and forecasts and straight to the final valuation. This setup prevents those messy, circular references that can hide some really nasty errors. It's like a data assembly line.
All right, let's get building. First things first, we've got to survey the land. Before we can even think about building up, we have to look back and really understand the company's history.
Okay, so we're officially at step 1, digging into the company's historical performance. You just can't predict where a company is going if you don't know where it's been. This is our foundation.
Now, you've got a choice here. You could just grab standardized data from a service like Bloomberg or Capital IQ. It's fast, for sure, but here's the catch. Those services often lump different financial items together, which can hide some really crucial details. If you want the full story, you've got to roll up your sleeves and dive into the company's actual annual reports, the footnotes and all. That's where the good stuff is hidden.
Okay, foundation's poured. Time to drop the floor plan. For us, that means forecasting revenue and the rest of the income statement. This is what's going to define the size and the shape of the company's future.
All right, this is the heart of the forecast right here. Steps 2 and 3. Everything, and I mean everything, starts with revenue. It's the single most important driver of a company's value. Once we get a handle on that, the rest of the income statement starts to fall into place. So when you're trying to figure out revenue, you've basically got 2 ways to go. A top-down forecast is where you start with the entire market, like the total amount of money people spend on coffee globally, and then you estimate your company's slice of that pie. This works great for big, mature industries. A bottom-up approach, on the other hand, builds the forecast from the ground up, looking at things like customer growth or sales per location.
Let's make this real with a company like Costco. With a bottom-up forecast, you wouldn't just pull a total revenue number out of thin air. No way. You'd build it up piece by piece. You'd forecast U.S. sales, international sales, and membership fees all separately. And behind each of those numbers, you'd have even more detail, like store growth and sales per square foot.
Once you've nailed down that revenue forecast, the rest of the income statement is surprisingly simple. Most of the other lines, like your cost of goods sold or SG&A expenses, usually follow a straightforward 3-step process. Here's the playbook. Step 1, pick a driver. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be revenue. Step 2, estimate a ratio based on what's happened in the past. For example, maybe the cost of goods sold has always been about 37.5% of revenue, and step 3, you just multiply that ratio by your future revenue number. Simple, right? But incredibly effective.
All right, our floor plan is done. Now we start putting up the walls, running the plumbing, building the actual structure. In our world, that means forecasting the balance sheet. Okay, on to steps 4 and 5. We're building out the balance sheet.
This is where we figure out the assets the company needs to make all that revenue we just forecasted, and then we make sure it all follows that golden rule of accounting. It absolutely must balance.
So here's a fundamental rule. The balance sheet always has to balance. Assets have to equal liabilities plus equity. But after you've made all your forecasts, what happens if your model shows you have way more cash coming in than you planned for? That creates a hole. To fill that hole, we use what's called a plug. Usually we'll just treat that leftover cash as excess cash, or maybe use it to pay down debt. It's the final tweak to make sure the whole financial structure holds together.
And there it is. The blueprint is finished, all the numbers are in place. But let's be honest, a blueprint is totally useless if you don't know how to read it. So the final step is to calculate the metrics that tell us what this whole thing actually means.
And here we are, the final step, number 6, calculating ROIC and free cash flow. This is the payoff. This is the whole point of the exercise, really.
So what on earth is ROIC? It stands for Return on Invested Capital. Think of it this way. It's a super important metric that tells you how good a company is at taking a dollar of investment in things like factories or technology and turning it into pure profit. A high ROIC is a big sign of a quality business.
And that brings us to the grand prize, free cash flow. This is what it's all about. It's the actual spendable cash left over for investors after the company pays all its bills and makes all its necessary investments. This is the bottom line, because this stream of future cash is what ultimately tells you what the company is truly worth.
Which brings us to a final thought. We've just walked through this really rigorous, step-by-step process that feels very scientific. But every single one of those steps required us to make an assumption, a judgment call. So, what do you think? Is building this financial blueprint more of an art, or is it a pure science? It's a great question to chew on.